looks like we may have a pretty good idea of when Caitlin Clark is next going to play basketball, and it's not during the WNBA season. At least that's not the next thing that she's got her eye on. It's not Unrivaled, and it's not Athletes Unlimited, but it is sooner than the WNBA season.
The WNBA just got hit with the kind of reality check it's been quietly dreading for months, and it came straight from the one player they can't afford to lose. Caitlin Clark, the generational talent who dragged women's basketball into the national spotlight all by herself, has done something that no one in the sport saw coming. She turned down everything. No Unrivaled, no Athletes Unlimited, no flashy overseas contract worth more than her entire rookie salary. She walked away from all of it. And now, behind closed doors, the entire basketball establishment is scrambling to figure out why. Because on the surface, it looks like burnout or disinterest. But anyone who's followed Clark long enough knows better. This isn't about exhaustion. It's not even about rest. It's a move so strategic, so deliberate, that it's quietly flipping the power dynamic of an entire league. What's really going on here isn't a player stepping back. It's a player taking control. While the headlines scream Caitlin Clark sitting out, the truth might be the opposite. She's not retreating from basketball. She's redefining her relationship with it. Every league, every sponsor, every executive in women's basketball just realized that Clark doesn't need their stage to shine. They need her to survive. And if you think this is just about a player skipping the offseason, think again. Because what Clark is doing right now, away from the court, away from the cameras, could end up being the single most powerful play in modern sports. And here's the twist nobody's talking about. While fans argue about her injury timeline and critics wonder if she's losing her edge, Clark's been quietly setting up something far bigger than anyone realizes. This isn't the story of a rookie who couldn't keep up with the spotlight. It's the story of an athlete who understands how to control it. And once you see the bigger picture, you'll realize this might be the smartest move any player has made in the history of women's basketball. When the news first broke that Caitlin Clark was turning down every single offseason opportunity, the basketball world couldn't believe it. No Unrivaled, no Athletes Unlimited, no flashy overseas contract worth more than her entire rookie salary. It wasn't just a surprise, it was a shockwave. These weren't minor side gigs. These were the same leagues and international deals that most players rely on to keep their careers financially viable. For Caitlin, who made around $200,000 in her rookie WNBA season, the chance to double or even triple that overseas was sitting right there on the table. And she said no. On paper, it makes no sense. The average WNBA player spends her offseason grinding in Europe, Russia, or Asia, not because she wants to, but because she has to. The paychecks are bigger, the facilities are better, and for years, that's been the only way to make women's basketball sustainable as a career. But Caitlin, she's rewriting the entire playbook. Her decision to skip every offseason league wasn't just a career choice, it was a statement, a message that she doesn't have to play by the old rules because she's already changed the game those rules were written for. This is the same player who turned Iowa basketball into must-watch TV, who pulled more viewers in March Madness than some NBA playoff games, and who had corporations lined up before she even played her first professional minute. She's not operating from scarcity like most athletes in her position. She's operating from leverage. That's what makes this refusal so jarring and so brilliant. While her competitors chase short-term paychecks, Clark is betting on something bigger, her long-term dominance and her brand's global power. But that's where the confusion starts. If this was just about business, why now? Why walk away from months of easy exposure and guaranteed money? Why risk losing rhythm and relevance when she's the face of the sport? Those questions are what sent fans and analysts spiraling, trying to connect the dots that didn't seem to fit. But the truth is, Clark doesn't need to chase the spotlight. She is the spotlight. And the league she's walking away from, they're realizing it the hard way. Because her silence, her absence is louder than any headline. Every time she turns down another offer, it's not weakness, it's control. She's reminding everyone who's really holding the power now. But to understand the full scope of this decision, you have to rewind to where all of this started, the so-called injury that no one could get a straight answer about. Because that's where this story stops being about basketball and starts being about something much bigger. From the very beginning, something about Caitlin Clark's injury story just didn't sit right with anyone paying close attention. The timeline never made sense, not for an elite athlete, not for someone with her reputation for durability and competitiveness. Back in July, the Indiana Fever reported that Clark was dealing with a groin strain and a high ankle sprain. Standard stuff, the kind of thing every professional athlete deals with at some point. The kind of injury that, with proper rehab, should sideline you for 6 to 8 weeks, maybe 10 if you're being extra cautious. But then the weeks turned into months. The offseason started. Other players were already back in training camps or posting workouts online. And Clark, she was still out. By November, fans were starting to do the math, and the math wasn't adding up. 4 months for an ankle and a groin? NFL players tear their ACLs and return faster than that. NBA guards with the same type of injury are back in half the time. But somehow, Caitlin Clark, one of the most finely tuned athletes in the sport, was still on the sidelines, smiling in interviews but nowhere near a basketball court. Every update from the Fever sounded more like a PR statement than a medical report. Precautionary measures, load management, day-to-day evaluation, it was the kind of corporate language that makes you trust them less, not more.
And that's when fans started noticing things that didn't fit the narrative. If Clark was really too injured to play, why was she doing media appearances, sitting for hour-long interviews, posing for sponsorship shoots? She didn't look like someone struggling to walk. She looked like someone strategically waiting. The more the team tried to clarify, the more questions they created. Every time they released a statement, the wording felt cautious, almost like lawyers were signing off on it first. Suddenly, the most open and transparent player in women's basketball was surrounded by silence and spin. Even her coach's words, meant to sound supportive, ended up adding fuel to the speculation. Multiple setbacks, working her way back, another setback. Those phrases don't describe a mild sprain. They describe something else entirely. Mismanagement? Or maybe something the public wasn't supposed to know yet. And while fans debated whether it was worse than reported, a different theory began to form. Maybe the injury wasn't the problem. Maybe it was the excuse. Because when the best player in the league disappears for months and no one, not even her team, can give a straight answer, people start to look deeper. Some thought it was a chemistry issue with other players. Others suspected something even more strategic, that the Fever were intentionally holding her out to protect her long-term health, or maybe even to quietly position themselves for a higher draft pick. And then there were the wilder ideas, that she was negotiating behind the scenes, exploring future moves, or simply refusing to risk her body for a system that wasn't protecting her value. None of it was confirmed, of course, but that's the thing about silence. When organizations stop being transparent, fans fill in the blanks themselves. And this wasn't just silence. This was strategy. The Fever weren't talking. Clark wasn't talking. But something was happening, and it wasn't just rehab. It felt calculated, like a move in a chess game that everyone else was just beginning to realize they were a part of. Because if the injury timeline didn't make sense, maybe that was the point. Maybe Clark wasn't just recovering, maybe she was waiting for the perfect moment to take back control of her story, her health, and her image. Waiting to remind everyone that she's not just a player in the WNBA system, she's the system's engine. And once you start to see it that way, the entire injury saga starts to look less like bad luck and more like the opening move in something much bigger. The strangest part about Caitlin Clark's entire injury saga wasn't the injury itself, it was the silence that followed it. For months, everything around her felt off. Reporters couldn't get straight answers, teammates avoided specifics, and the Indiana Fever's updates sounded like they were written in code. It wasn't the usual transparency fans were used to from a rookie who had practically lived in the spotlight her entire career. This was something different, controlled, calculated, and almost eerie in its precision. Every public word about Clark felt filtered, like it had to pass through 3 layers of approval before anyone dared to say it out loud. And that's when fans started doing what fans always do best. They started connecting dots the team didn't want connected. Why was the most marketable athlete in the league suddenly disappearing from the court, but not from the cameras? Why was she able to do interviews, endorsement appearances, and promotional events, but not play even a few minutes of preseason ball? It didn't add up, unless it wasn't supposed to. That's where the theories began to swirl. Some insiders claimed it was internal tension, whispers of locker room chemistry issues between Clark and other players. Others suspected something even more strategic, that the Fever were intentionally holding her out to protect her long-term health, or maybe even to quietly position themselves for a higher draft pick. And then there were the wilder ideas, that she was negotiating behind the scenes, exploring future moves, or simply refusing to risk her body for a system that wasn't protecting her value. None of it was confirmed, of course, but that's the thing about silence. When organizations stop being transparent, fans fill in the blanks themselves. And this wasn't just silence. This was strategy. The Fever weren't talking, Clark wasn't talking, but something was happening, and it wasn't just rehab. It felt calculated, like move in a chess game that everyone else was just beginning to realize they were a part of. Because if the injury timeline didn't make sense, maybe that was the point. Maybe Clark wasn't just recovering, maybe she was waiting for the perfect moment to take back control of her story, her health, and her image. Waiting to remind everyone that she's not just a player in the WNBA system, she's the system's engine. And once you start to see it that way, the entire injury saga starts to look less like bad luck and more like the opening move in something much bigger.
The strangest part about Caitlin Clark's entire injury saga wasn't the injury itself, it was the silence that followed it. For months, everything around her felt off. Reporters couldn't get straight answers, teammates avoided specifics, and the Indiana Fever's updates sounded like they were written in code. It wasn't the usual transparency fans were used to from a rookie who had practically lived in the spotlight her entire career. This was something different, controlled, calculated, and almost eerie in its precision. Every public word about Clark felt filtered, like it had to pass through 3 layers of approval before anyone dared to say it out loud. And that's when fans started doing what fans always do best. They started connecting dots the team didn't want connected. Why was the most marketable athlete in the league suddenly disappearing from the court but not from the cameras? Why was she able to do interviews, endorsement appearances, and promotional events, but not play even a few minutes of preseason ball? It didn't add up, unless it wasn't supposed to. That's where the theories began to swirl. Some insiders claimed it was internal tension, whispers of locker room chemistry issues between Clark and other players. Others suspected something even more strategic, that the Fever were intentionally holding her out to protect her long-term health, or maybe even to quietly position themselves for a higher draft pick. And then there were the wild cards, the online rumors that Clark was using her injury time to explore her next major move, maybe even renegotiating behind the scenes or setting herself up for a future that extended far beyond the WNBA's current structure. None of it could be proven, but that wasn't the point. The secrecy had already done its job. The lack of answers became the story. And that's where Caitlin Clark's brilliance starts to shine through. Because whether by design or by coincidence, that silence turned into leverage. Every day she stayed quiet, her mystique grew. The same fans who once expected daily updates started obsessively refreshing feeds, waiting for any glimpse of what she was planning next. The uncertainty built curiosity, and curiosity drives attention, the single most valuable currency in modern sports. While her peers were grinding overseas for exposure, Clark was making headlines by not playing. The Fever may have thought they were protecting their investment, but Clark was protecting something even bigger. Her control over the narrative. She didn't need to explain herself. She didn't need to chase interviews or clarify rumors. She let the speculation work for her. Every unanswered question amplified her presence without her having to lift a finger. The silence became her strategy, a masterclass in controlled mystery that kept her name alive even when she wasn't on the court. And make no mistake, silence like that isn't accidental. It's power. Because when the media can't fill in the blanks, they keep you in the headlines trying to. Clark turned what could have been a career setback into a storyline. While everyone else scrambled to guess what was happening, she was setting up her next move, a move that would make every rumor, every theory, and every vague press release suddenly make sense.
Because what if all that waiting wasn't about recovery at all? What if it was about positioning, about reclaiming control from a league that depends on her every appearance to stay relevant? The silence wasn't weakness, it was the sound of someone playing chess while everyone else played checkers. And once you understand that, it's clear. Caitlin Clark wasn't on the sidelines because she was hurt. She was on the sidelines because she was planning her next power play. Now that the dust has settled, it's starting to look like Caitlin Clark's so-called time off was never about recovery at all. It was about control. What looked like absence was actually strategy. While other players were chasing short-term paychecks and posting off-season workouts, Clark was sitting quietly at the center of a plan that in hindsight feels genius. She wasn't just healing her body, she was protecting her value. She understood something most athletes don't learn until it's too late. Every appearance, every headline, every public moment either adds to your brand or dilutes it. And Clark wasn't about to waste hers on anything small. To the outside world, it might have seemed like she was disappearing. But if you zoom out, the pattern becomes clear. Every time she said no, to Unrivaled, to Athletes Unlimited, to overseas teams flashing six-figure contracts, she was reinforcing a message without saying a word. I'm not like everyone else. The other players need exposure. She's the exposure. They're fighting for sponsorships. She's turning them down. They're trying to stay relevant. She's building mystique. That's not arrogance. That's understanding leverage. And no one in women's sports has ever held it quite like she does right now. Because this isn't just about basketball. It's about the business of being Caitlin Clark. She's in a position that only a handful of athletes in history have reached, the point where your personal brand has more gravity than the league you play in. Think about that. The WNBA doesn't elevate her. She elevates the WNBA. Every network, every sponsor, every trending clip depends on her presence to carry momentum. And that kind of influence changes the rules entirely. She doesn't have to play everywhere. She only has to play once, and the entire industry adjusts around her schedule. While her competitors are flying across the world to make ends meet, Clark is taking a different approach, one that's bigger than the game itself. She's building anticipation. She's turning patience into power. Because when you make the audience wait, when you disappear at your peak, you create demand. Every day she's not on the court, the curiosity grows, the questions pile up, and when she finally does come back, the impact multiplies. It's not just a return, it's an event. That's the real game she's playing, not the one between the lines, but the one behind the scenes, the game of timing, leverage, and narrative control. The kind of game that only the greats can play successfully. She's not chasing the off-season spotlight, she's manipulating it. She's proving that in modern sports, the real power doesn't belong to the league or the executives. It belongs to the athlete who understands how to own her story. And now that story is entering its most critical phase. Because while Clark was quietly building her brand empire, something else was happening. Something the WNBA never saw coming. The moment she stepped away, the league began to crumble in ways no one could ignore. Ratings fell, hype vanished, and that newfound mainstream momentum evaporated almost overnight. It's proof of what everyone in the room already knew but didn't want to admit. Caitlin Clark isn't just a player in the WNBA. She is the WNBA. And her absence didn't just expose that truth, it made the entire league feel it. Because when one player can shift the numbers, the headlines, and the culture all by herself, that's not a coincidence. That's power. And as the league struggled to fill the silence she left behind, Clark was sitting back, watching it all unfold, knowing exactly what she was doing. She wasn't gone, she was just letting everyone else realize how empty the game feels without her in it. The moment Caitlin Clark stepped off the court, the WNBA's momentum didn't just slow down, it collapsed. Practically overnight, the league went from the center of sports conversation to background noise again. The same outlets that couldn't stop talking about her debut suddenly moved on. The same networks that were fighting for broadcast rights started reshuffling schedules, and the energy that once made every Fever game feel like a national event, gone. It was as if someone flipped a switch and the lights went out on the league's short-lived mainstream moment. You could see the difference everywhere. Attendance numbers started to dip, jersey sales flattened, social media engagement, the same buzz that once had Clark trending daily, dried up completely. Highlight accounts that had built entire followings off her logo threes and no-look passes were suddenly scraping for content. ESPN stopped running WNBA segments in prime time. Even casual fans, the ones who tuned in just to see what the hype was about, disappeared the second Clark did. The league didn't just lose a player, it lost its gravitational pull. For the first time in decades, women's basketball had found a figure who could make every game feel like an event, who could make people who'd never watched before stop scrolling and pay attention. And when she was gone, all that momentum vanished into thin air. The Fever's games, once packed with cameras and new fans, returned to half-filled arenas and quiet press rooms. What had been a cultural phenomenon turned back to a niche product almost instantly. The irony is brutal. For years, the WNBA fought to prove that it wasn't dependent on one player or one moment. But Clark's rookie season made it clear. It was. She didn't just lift the league, she was the lift. The numbers prove it. Her games were setting record-breaking TV ratings, even outdrawing NBA broadcasts. Merchandise sales exploded the moment her name hit a jersey. The Fever went from one of the least talked about franchises in professional sports to a headline team overnight. And it was all because of her.
But once she went down, reality hit hard. The league's next big thing wasn't another star or another storyline. It was Clark, and only Clark. The WNBA tried everything to keep the momentum going. They spotlighted A'ja Wilson, they pushed new rivalries, they hyped playoff races with all the urgency they could fake. But no matter how much they marketed, the results were the same. Fans weren't watching for the league, they were watching for her. Inside the offices, the panic was real. Sponsorship partners started asking questions, the uncomfortable kind. Ticket projections had to be revised. Media executives who once saw women's basketball as the next growth frontier were suddenly rethinking their investments. For years, the WNBA had begged for mainstream relevance, and Clark had delivered it on a silver platter. Then, in a matter of weeks, it was gone, exposing how fragile that success really was. And here's the part no one in the league office will ever admit publicly. Caitlin Clark's absence didn't just hurt their bottom line, it revealed their dependence. They'd built their future on her shoulders, and when she stopped playing, the entire foundation cracked. It was a brutal reminder that in modern sports, there are players, and then there are forces of nature. Clark wasn't a typical rookie. She was a one-woman ecosystem. And when that ecosystem shut down, everything connected to it suffered. The Fever felt it, the WNBA felt it, the networks felt it, and the fans, they just wanted her back. But Clark wasn't rushing. She was watching, waiting, letting the silence build pressure. Because every dip in viewership, every empty seat, every quiet headline only strengthened her position. The league was learning, the hard way, what happens when your brightest star steps away. Everything gets darker. And that's the moment Caitlin Clark truly became bigger than the WNBA itself. Because while they scrambled to fill the void, she was holding all the leverage and she knew exactly how to use it. By the time winter rolled around, the power dynamic in women's basketball had completely flipped, and Caitlin Clark was sitting comfortably at the top of it. What had once been a league trying to shape its rising star had turned into a league held together by her very presence. The WNBA needed Clark more than Clark needed the WNBA, and that simple truth had never been clearer. Think about it. The league had spent 25 years trying to build mainstream attention. 25 years of marketing campaigns, player spotlights, and partnerships that always seemed to fall just short.
Then Clark showed up, and in a single season, she accomplished what decades of effort couldn't. She made women's basketball matter to casual fans. She was appointment television. Every time she touched the ball, people who had never watched a WNBA game suddenly cared. Her storylines were trending, her highlights were viral, her name was on every talk show. The WNBA finally had its breakout moment, and it all hinged on one player. That's where the leverage shift began. Because once Clark stepped away, the illusion of stability disappeared. The league that had started to believe it could stand on its own realized how dependent it really was. Ratings dropped, sponsors hesitated, and media coverage faded, all because their centerpiece wasn't playing. And Clark? She was watching from the sidelines, probably realizing that she now held something far more valuable than stats or trophies: leverage. She'd proven that the machine doesn't move without her, that she doesn't need the WNBA's infrastructure to draw crowds, cameras, or money. She is the infrastructure. She built her following before the league ever signed her, and that following stayed loyal whether she played or not. It's a kind of power very few athletes ever achieve, the ability to dictate the terms of the conversation simply by existing. Michael Jordan had it. Serena Williams had it. LeBron James has it. Now, Caitlin Clark does too. That leverage changes everything. When a player reaches that level, the rules stop applying the same way. The league can't pressure her to play in off-season tournaments, can't dictate how her image is used, and definitely can't risk alienating her. She's not just a player anymore. She's a brand, a network, and an economy all rolled into one, and she knows it. What's wild about it is that Clark's control isn't built on confrontation. It's built on silence and results. She doesn't have to issue ultimatums or make demands. The numbers do it for her. When she's on the court, attendance spikes. When she's off it, engagement collapses. When she posts, it trends. When she doesn't, the feed feels empty. That's not hype. That's quantifiable influence. And the WNBA executives know exactly what that means. They can't afford to lose her. Not to injury, not to burnout, not to disinterest. They're realizing that protecting Caitlin Clark isn't just about protecting a player, it's about protecting the league's entire financial future. She's the reason they're in headlines, the reason new fans are watching, the reason networks are finally paying attention. She's not just an athlete in their system, she's the system's most valuable asset. But here's the genius of it all. Clark isn't abusing that leverage, she's using it strategically. She's reshaping what it means to be a modern athlete in a league that's still figuring itself out. She's quietly showing every player that the real power doesn't come from the paycheck or the platform. It comes from understanding your worth. And that's exactly what she's doing now.
Because the silence, the restraint, the patience, it all has a purpose. She's not just resting. She's waiting for the perfect moment to remind everyone what happens when she returns. The WNBA may have thought it was teaching Clark how to navigate the pros, but in reality, Clark's teaching the league how to survive in the new era of player power. And the best part? Her next move isn't just going to restore her leverage, it's going to redefine it. Because the comeback she's planning isn't about the WNBA at all. It's about something bigger, global, and impossible to ignore. And when that moment comes, every network, every fan, and every critic will realize that Caitlin Clark isn't just back in the game, she is the game. By early spring, whispers started turning into headlines. Caitlin Clark was gearing up for something massive. Not another endorsement deal, not a quiet scrimmage or preseason appearance. No, this was bigger. Word was spreading that her first real step back into competitive basketball wouldn't be a WNBA exhibition, but the Team USA Olympic qualifying tournament in Puerto Rico. That one decision, if true, instantly reframed everything. Suddenly, her long silence, her absence from the off-season leagues, her refusal to chase small paychecks, it all clicked. She wasn't disappearing, she was staging a return on the grandest possible stage. Because think about the optics. The same athlete the media claimed was ducking competition would now be stepping onto the court wearing a USA jersey under the brightest global spotlight women's basketball has to offer. No small market games, no half-empty gyms, no minor streaming platforms. This was prime-time, national broadcast, global audience. Clark's first dribble back wasn't just going to be seen, it was going to be broadcast everywhere. And that was no accident. That was design. Every move she'd made since July suddenly looked like part of a master plan. Skipping off-season leagues wasn't avoiding the grind. It was refusing to dilute her brand with anything less than a global stage. Sitting out months of domestic basketball wasn't about fear or fatigue. It was about preserving her body and her mystique for the exact moment when the world would be watching again. Clark wasn't just making a comeback. She was turning her return into an event. And the networks knew it. NBC, ESPN, Fox Sports, all of them were already circling, preparing coverage packages, promotional teasers, highlight reels. The buzz was returning, faster and louder than ever. The same media that had gone quiet during her absence was suddenly rushing to predict how her first game back would reshape everything. And you could feel it. The entire sports landscape was about to shift again. This wasn't just another athlete returning from an injury. This was a cultural reset. Because Caitlin Clark wasn't coming back to prove she could still play. She was coming back to own the moment, to reclaim the spotlight she built, on her terms, with her timing. Every step of this setup screamed control. From the timing of her training leaks to the cryptic mentions of her readiness, it was all part of the same deliberate buildup, the kind of suspense marketing teams dream of but rarely achieve organically. And when she finally takes that court in Puerto Rico, representing the USA for the first time since her college dominance, it won't just be about basketball. It'll be about redemption, validation, and the reclaiming of momentum that the WNBA lost in her absence. Every pass, every logo three, and every camera angle will be amplified by one unspoken truth. The queen of women's basketball is back, and she never really lost control. But what makes this comeback so fascinating isn't just the timing of the spectacle. It's the message underneath it all. Clark's not returning to prove herself to the league or to silence critics. She's returning to redefine the hierarchy, to show that when you understand your value, you don't chase exposure, you create it. She's walking back into the spotlight not as a rookie chasing relevance, but as the sport's singular force, commanding it. Because when Caitlin Clark laces up for Team USA, it won't just be another game. It'll be the official start of her second act. And if her first act broke records, this one is going to break the system. Caitlin Clark's decision to sit out wasn't just a basketball move. It was a branding masterclass. Every choice, every silence, every no she said to leagues begging for her participation built towards one thing: anticipation. And in the world of modern sports, anticipation is the most powerful marketing tool there is. Clark didn't have to post constant training clips or drop cryptic tweets to stay relevant. She did something far smarter. She vanished. And by disappearing at her peak, she turned absence into allure. Because here's the truth about attention. When someone as magnetic as Caitlin Clark suddenly goes quiet, people don't move on. They wait. They speculate. They crave the next chapter. That's how anticipation becomes currency. Clark understood that every time her name faded from a headline, the world's curiosity grew stronger. Every rumor, every fan theory, every bit of online debate kept her brand alive without her saying a word. That's not luck. That's strategy. Most athletes try to stay visible. They flood social media, overexpose themselves, and hope the spotlight doesn't shift somewhere else. Clark did the opposite. She controlled the silence. She let the hype breathe. It's the same playbook used by cultural icons who understand scarcity. Think of Michael Jordan stepping away before his first comeback, or Taylor Swift dropping silent before dropping an album that breaks streaming records. The mystery isn't a risk when you know your return will dominate the conversation. It's fuel.
And Caitlin Clark knows exactly how to use that fuel. When she finally reappears, it won't just be another athlete returning to competition. It'll be a cultural event. Brands know it, networks know it, even her rivals know it. Every camera will be pointed at her, every sports show will lead with her name, and every highlight will go viral before the game even ends. She's built herself into a headline machine, and she's doing it by controlling the one thing no one else in her field seems to understand: timing. What she's doing right now isn't playing basketball, it's playing the market. She's leveraging anticipation to make her value skyrocket. Every day she's not playing, her worth increases. Because when she finally comes back, it won't just be about performance, it'll be about spectacle. It's not if she plays well, it's how big the moment will feel when she does. That's the psychology of branding at its highest level. And what's wild is that Clark isn't doing this with a PR team scripting every move. She's doing it through intuition, through an understanding of how audiences think, how they attach meaning to silence, how they interpret patience as confidence. When she declined all those off-season leagues, it wasn't just about avoiding injury or fatigue, it was about protecting her image. Because not every court deserves Caitlin Clark. Not every game should have access to her brand. By being selective, she elevated her worth. She turned exclusivity into identity. This is how stars become icons, not by oversaturating the market, but by mastering scarcity. Clark isn't trying to be seen more, she's trying to be seen right. And that difference is everything. Because when she steps onto that court again, it won't feel routine, it'll feel historic. Every fan who's been waiting months to see her play will be watching not just for basketball, but for the moment. And that moment, that controlled, explosive, perfectly timed return, is what transforms a player into a legend. Caitlin Clark isn't just rewriting how women's basketball is played, she's rewriting how it's marketed. She's proving that in a sport still fighting for mainstream space, one player's brand can outgrow the entire system. And the scariest part for the league? She's doing it effortlessly. She's turning patience into power, silence into strategy, and curiosity into currency. And when she finally returns to the court, it won't just mark her comeback, it'll mark the moment women's basketball officially enters the era of Caitlin Clark Inc. Caitlin Clark's rise and the way she's playing this new era of visibility isn't just changing her story, it's changing the story of women's basketball itself. For decades, the league and its stars have been fighting for mainstream attention, trying to convince networks, sponsors, and fans that their product deserves equal weight. And for the first time, one player has proven it doesn't take a whole marketing department or a league-wide campaign to make that happen. It takes one athlete who understands how to bridge competition and culture. And Caitlin Clark has done exactly that. Her approach has quietly rewritten the unspoken rules of how women's sports are valued. Before Clark, success in the WNBA was measured by traditional stats, points, assists, championships, MVPs. Now it's measured by something far more powerful: impact. Who moves the needle? Who brings new audiences to the game? Who changes how people talk about the sport when they're not watching it? Clark's dominance proved that women's basketball isn't suffering from a talent gap, it's been suffering from a visibility gap, and she just showed the entire industry how to close it.
Every decision she's made, from refusing off-season leagues to mastering silence, has created a template for a new generation of athletes. She's proving that you can take control of your brand, your narrative, and your career trajectory without waiting for institutional validation. Future players are watching closely. They're realizing they don't have to take every deal or every opportunity. They can be selective, strategic, intentional. They can own their image instead of renting it out. Clark's influence is turning young players into entrepreneurs before they ever hit the professional stage. And the WNBA? It's being forced to evolve, fast. For years, it operated under the assumption that its players needed the league to be relevant. But Clark's story flipped that dynamic upside down. She's made it clear that the league needs to rise to meet her, not the other way around. That means better marketing, better player protection, smarter partnerships, and bigger investments in storytelling. Because if the WNBA wants to keep its new audience, the millions who discovered the game through Caitlin Clark, it has to treat her presence like a signal, not a shortcut. Her comeback will likely mark the start of a new phase for women's basketball, one that feels global, modern, and unapologetically ambitious. When she steps onto the court in a Team USA jersey, she won't just be representing the country, she'll be representing a movement that's finally breaking through. Young girls in gyms across the world will see not just a star player, but a blueprint, proof that you can dominate the sport and the system around it. But the deeper shift is cultural. The days of women's basketball living in the shadow of men's sports are fading. Clark's ability to command viewership numbers, viral moments, and global attention has erased the old arguments about marketability. She's proven that people will watch if you give them something and someone to believe in. Her story is proof that women's sports don't need to imitate anyone else's model. They just need to own their uniqueness, their style, their stars, and their stories. In a few years, when analysts look back at this moment, they'll call it the turning point, the season when one player's patience forced an entire industry to grow up. Because Caitlin Clark didn't just become the face of the WNBA, she became the symbol of what's possible when talent meets timing and confidence meets strategy. The future of women's basketball is no longer about proving worth, it's about expanding it. And Caitlin Clark has already shown the world how. The next generation won't have to fight for the spotlight. Thanks to her, it'll already be shining when they arrive. In the end, everything Caitlin Clark has done, every refusal, every quiet month, every carefully timed reappearance, adds up to one undeniable truth. This was never about stepping back. It was about stepping up. What looked like silence was strategy. What looked like rest was preparation. And what looked like distance was, in reality, the most calculated power move modern sports has seen in years. Caitlin Clark didn't just pause her career, she paused the entire conversation, forcing the basketball world to feel her absence and recognize her worth. While others saw an injury, she saw an opportunity, a chance to reset the balance of power between player and league, to remind everyone that she's not a product of the WNBA system. The system is a product of her presence. Every article written, every dip in ratings, every empty seat proved it. She turned what could have been a setback into a silent negotiation, one she won without saying a single word. And now, as she prepares to step back onto the court, she's not just returning to the game, she's redefining it. This isn't about proving she still got it. It's about proving she never lost it. It's about showing that control doesn't come from playing every minute. It comes from owning every moment. Clark has mastered the art of timing, the rare ability to dictate when the world watches, listens, and reacts. She doesn't chase momentum anymore. She creates it. That's why her comeback won't just be a basketball story, it'll be a cultural event. The kind of moment that shifts perception and power all at once. When she steps onto that floor again wearing that Team USA jersey, it won't just signal her return to competition. It'll signal a new era for women's basketball. One built not on visibility borrowed from others, but on the star power of its own. Because in the end, Caitlin Clark's greatest play wasn't a shot, a pass, or a stat line. It was understanding her value before anyone else did, and moving accordingly. She proved that in a world where leagues, sponsors, and narratives try to define athletes, the real power belongs to the ones who define themselves. Her so-called offseason was never a break. It was a lesson in patience, in leverage, and in knowing when to sit out so you can return on your own terms. And when she does, the same league that once thought it was protecting its future will realize it was being carried by it the entire time. Because sometimes the smartest way to win the game is to stop playing it until everyone else realizes you already won.